This Week in the Boardroom, brought to you by Corporate Board Member and host NYSE Euronext, along with Governance Knowledge Partner Paul Weiss and contributing partners National Investor Relations Institute and the Society of Corporate Secretaries and Governance Professionals.
Welcome to this edition of This Week in the Boardroom. I'm TK Kerstetter with Corporate Board Member, and it's my pleasure to welcome everybody to this week's show. This week we're going to deal with a topic that we really have not dealt with on This Week in the Boardroom before, and that's going to be preparing for sustainability and environmental risk. And it's my pleasure to welcome our guest expert for this. Steve Starbuck is the partner and America's leader for climate change and sustainability services for Ernst & Young. So welcome, Steve.
Thank you, TK. Happy to be here.
And I think because it's the first time that we're dealing with this, we might need to take a step back. And let's first, if we could, maybe define for our viewing audience what really is all-inclusive in the sustainability. And then I think it would also be good to say why corporate board members should care about sustainability. So let's start there.
Sure. Sustainability can mean different things to every organization, but if you think of it from a business context, and how I would recommend your board member audience think about it, is think of it as creating long-term shareholder value by capitalizing on the opportunities in managing the risks associated with environmental, social, and economic factors. And the measurement of the performance of companies in those three areas is often referred to as the triple bottom line. Measuring how well a company manages the opportunities and risks around the environmental issues affecting the company, around the social issues that are affecting the company, and then doing all that while still meeting the expectations from a bottom line perspective of their shareholders. We're seeing a lot of interest in sustainability coming from the boardroom community today. In fact, we're seeing a lot of boards even asking for some education on this.
Well, it's not a surprise when you look at what's happened in the world in today's youth. But, you know, in the past, and maybe this is a demographic thing, but there's directors that maybe haven't lived in all of this green stuff growing up. And in addition to that, some of our research in the past has shown where when going gets tough, in other words, when times that companies are looking at survival or funding or whatever, these other issues, diversity, social responsibility issues, seem to get pushed aside a little bit. Now, until this year we seem to have an inordinate amount of shareholder proposals that touched on environment, on sustainability, on social responsibility issues. So all of those is sort of changing the perspective on the board, which I'm sure is leading to the request for more training on that. But I would assume that this is something that boards should start to accept as a reality and take more focus on.
Well, you make a good observation on the demographics of the typical boardroom. A lot of board members are senior executives who in their business careers haven't had to deal with some of the business pressures associated with the triple bottom line today. Today you're seeing that shareholders, particularly institutional investors, as you mentioned, are taking a much greater interest in the performance of companies around sustainability. You're seeing major business customers requesting quantitative data around the performance of a company in both social and environmental issues. There are over 100 ratings agencies, ratings, rankings, and indices out there that are actually comparing the performance of companies around the triple bottom line among their peers and among other companies. A big interest group is the employee group today, and it's becoming a recruiting and a retention challenge for companies, particularly the young people coming out of school today are actually looking at the performance of companies around environmental and social issues in making decisions as to what company they want to work for and what company perhaps they want to stay with after they go to work for them. So we're seeing it across a number of different stakeholders. Companies are also receiving pressure from regulatory agencies and the government. A natural one is the EPA, but the SEC has gotten into the act, challenging companies or reminding companies that they have a responsibility to identify risks, particularly around climate change. Back in February of 2010, the SEC issued interpretive guidance reminding companies that they should identify the risks associated with climate change. And an interesting footnote in that guidance, which hasn't really gotten much attention, was a footnote that talked about the CEO and the CFO certification process. And those executives are responsible for certifying that they have controls in place to measure the risks that should be reported, the material risks that should be reported in the annual filings. In that footnote, they said one of the risks that you need to make sure you have controls on and that you're certifying to is that you have the controls to measure the risks associated with climate change. So we're seeing that the Federal Trade Commission is about to release new guidelines around green advertising and cracking down on companies that are making claims about their products that they can't substantiate. And so there's regulatory risks, there's opportunities with customers to expand market, and there's also an expectation from the investing community that companies are going to be focusing on this. We actually did a paper recently looking at the shareholder resolutions that you referred to. And we've seen over the last decade, and particularly over the last couple of years, that there's been a significant increase in shareholder resolutions around environmental and social issues. And that's an important stat, but the thing that I found most interesting about our research that we did is the level of shareholder support has been increasing. So it's not just a minority activist shareholder group that's bringing these resolutions to the table, but this past year we saw over 20% average support for these resolutions. And if you look at the resolutions that received over 30% support, which is a critical level that where boardrooms need to start paying attention, over a third of these resolutions in this last proxy season received over 30% support. So we're seeing more mainline shareholder interest in this. We're seeing the regulators taking interest in it, business customers, employees, something that boardrooms need to be paying attention to.
Nothing like board shareholder resolutions to create focus in the boardroom, right?
Right. And really one of the things we're seeing is, and what I would suggest to maybe your first question is, why should board members pay attention to this and start trying to get educated on these issues, is that understanding a company's performance around the triple bottom line will help the board member understand what are the material issues that are important to the company's shareholders and other stakeholders. It'll give them an understanding of how their company is addressing those issues. Is it proactive or is it more reactive, waiting on events or shareholder pressure? And understanding what's being reported out in the public domain on that performance, and are the controls in place at the company that when information is being put into the public domain, is that information credible, and is it consistent with information that may be going out through the regulatory channels?
Well, now we've given a quick overview on sustainability and why it's important and some of the activity that we have. One of the things we want to make sure we do is answer the question, okay, knowing all this, Steve, what advice would we give to board members today on what they should be doing to respond to this new focus?
Well, first of all, as we said in the beginning, a lot of board members have not experienced the business challenges around the triple bottom line in their business careers. So the boards that are looking to get educated on the issue are doing the right thing, I think. So first, get familiar. Challenge the management at the companies to get you the internal information on what the companies are doing so that they can understand, does the company have a handle on what are the business drivers, what are the issues that are most important to the companies. And then some companies are putting it on the board agenda as a standing board agenda, setting up maybe a separate committee to address it. I actually had one client, a sustainability officer at one client, that said she was invited to every board meeting to present on what she was doing. So there was a standing agenda item for her to present. And she said, Steve, I knew that we were making progress and that the board was really taking an interest in this when we switched from them asking me to come and present to them asking me to come, and they told me what they wanted to hear. And that was an interesting crossover. And I think if boards get to that point, then that's a good litmus test for, are the boards engaged and are they getting management involved?
Well, you know, we can't do this topic justice in a 15-minute show, but this is a great reminder of everybody that there's information out there for a board to get refreshed on and be knowledgeable on. I might suggest this to the audience as well. There's some great pieces that have come out of some of the research and some of the work that has been done by E&Y on this. And for example, here's one example I have here is the 7 questions CEOs and boards should ask about the triple bottom line reporting, which is one of the things that you referenced. But if you want more additional information on this, you can go to www.ey.com/climate change. And you can get copies, PDF copies of this information that will be helpful to you. A couple of announcements to make as we wrap up here. First of all, next week, believe it or not, we are going to be holding our 100th This Week in the Boardroom show. And for that reason, it's going to be a special show that we're going to bring you, and we're inviting back some of our high-profile guests, not the least of which is Duncan Niederauer, who is the CEO of the NYSE Euronext, who in fact was our first guest on our very first show 100 shows ago. So we hope that you will turn in. It's going to be a little longer than normal because we have some interesting facts to look back on and reminisce about. Also, for you small cap companies, it's not too late to sign up for the Russell 2000 Small Cap Growth Conference that's on September 14th. If you contact corporate board member and say that you heard this on the This Week in the Boardroom show, there are some benefits on bringing your board members, so I would encourage you to do that. And on the next day, which is September 15th, there's going to be a very interesting D&O webinar, a liability webinar for all you board members that want to understand some of the key issues today that's involved with the risks of serving on a board. So, Steve, with that, I want to thank you again for joining us. And I want to thank all of you for joining us and look forward to seeing you again next week when we'll take another look at a critical topic. In this case, our 100th anniversary show. So we will see you then.
Join us again next week for This Week in the Boardroom, brought to you by corporate board member and host NYSE Euronext, along with governance knowledge partner Paul Weiss and contributing partners National Investor Relations Institute and the Society of Corporate Secretaries and Governance Professionals.